The day humanity learned how to end itself was not marked by a scream, but by applause. On a desert morning in July 1945, scientists at Trinity watched a new sun rise from the sand. They had spent years unlocking the atom, racing against fascism, convinced that knowledge would save the world. When the flash came, some cheered, some wept, and some felt only a hollow silence. In that moment, humanity crossed a threshold it could never return from. The bomb worked, and the future became conditional. What followed was not triumph, but a fever. Cities celebrated victory, but beneath the parades ran a current of dread. America had unleashed a power that erased the line between defense and annihilation. Hiroshima and Nagasaki proved the weapon's terrible promise. 2 bombs, 2 cities, hundreds of thousands dead, an empire brought to its knees. Yet instead of ending war, the bomb gave it immortality. It promised safety only through perpetual threat. When the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic device in 1949, the illusion of American security shattered overnight. There would be no monopoly on Armageddon. Both sides now possessed the means to erase civilization in hours, and neither trusted the other not to use it. Out of that tension came a doctrine that would define the second half of the 20th century: deterrence. The logic was simple, almost elegant. If both sides can destroy each other completely, then neither will dare to strike first. It was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD, and it turned fear into policy. But fear is never stable. To maintain deterrence, each side needed to guarantee that it could retaliate even after suffering a first strike. That demand for certainty began to twist the machinery of war into something inhuman. The question haunting generals and engineers was not how to prevent apocalypse, but how to automate it. What if a surprise attack decapitated command? What if communications failed? What if hesitation cost survival? The answer was to build systems that could think faster than humans, systems that would respond automatically, ensuring the end would come even if no one was left to order it. Thus began the era of the Doomsday Machines. At first they were theoretical, the fever dreams of strategists like Herman Kahn and Thomas Schelling, men who treated extinction as an equation. Kahn wrote calmly of megadeaths, of acceptable losses, of escalation ladders leading to nuclear exchange. In glossy Rand Corporation reports, annihilation became a manageable variable. The goal was not to prevent it, but to make it predictable. If both sides knew the rules, perhaps no one would break them. But reality has a way of mocking theory. In 1952, the United States tested the first hydrogen bomb. Its explosion vaporized an island in the Pacific, carving a crater a mile wide. The weapon was 1,000 times stronger than Hiroshima's, a miniature star unleashed. 3 years later, the Soviets answered with their own. The arms race shifted into hyperdrive. More bombs, bigger bombs, faster delivery. Each advancement made the world less safe. Submarines carried missiles beneath the waves, invisible and unstoppable. Jet bombers circled the poles 24 hours a day, engines humming with atomic payloads. Underground silos dotted the Midwest, each holding a rocket capable of erasing a city. Humanity had built redundancy into destruction. The engineers called it stability. Philosophers called it madness. In 1958, the U.S. Air Force introduced airborne alert operations, fleets of B-52s armed with nuclear weapons that never landed, so a first strike could not eliminate them. The program was codenamed Chrome Dome, and for years, bombers circled endlessly above the Arctic. The cost was staggering, the danger worse. There were accidents, fires, mid-air collisions, bombs dropped by mistake. Each incident brushed against oblivion. In 1961, a B-52 broke apart over Goldsboro, North Carolina. 2 hydrogen bombs fell to Earth. One safety switch failed. A single low-voltage signal separated the East Coast from vaporization. Later analysis showed that out of 4 safety devices, 3 malfunctioned. The Doomsday Machine had nearly armed itself. Across the ocean, the Soviets faced the same contradictions. Their leadership feared the United States might launch a decapitating first strike. To ensure retaliation, they built underground command posts, hardened silos, and eventually an automated system known by a chilling name, Perimeter, or, in the West, the Dead Hand. Conceived in the early 1980s, it could detect nuclear detonations on Soviet soil and automatically launch a full counterattack if communications with the Kremlin were lost. It was designed to operate even if every human decision-maker was dead. The system that guaranteed humanity's survival depended on machines to decide when it should die. But decades before Perimeter, the same logic had already taken hold. After the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the closest the world ever came to nuclear war, both superpowers realized how little separated miscalculation from extinction. 13 days of brinkmanship, misread signals, and human stubbornness had brought the planet within minutes of annihilation. The crisis ended through luck as much as diplomacy. In its aftermath, each side vowed never to flirt with catastrophe again, and immediately began building technology to ensure that, next time, catastrophe would happen automatically. Satellites watched for missile launches, radar networks scanned the skies, computers tracked trajectories. Early warning centers were manned day and night, their walls glowing with maps of potential death. The logic was self-reinforcing. Because machines might fail, more machines were needed to check them. The chain of command grew longer, the margin for error smaller. A flock of geese mistaken for incoming missiles, a faulty chip in a radar screen, a training tape inserted by mistake. Any of these could trigger alerts that rippled up the chain toward the final decision. On multiple occasions, only a single human's hesitation prevented the end. One such man was Stanislav Petrov. In 1983, he sat in a Soviet bunker monitoring launch detection satellites when alarms blared. The system reported 5 incoming U.S. missiles. Protocol demanded immediate retaliation. Petrov's instincts told him it was a glitch, too few missiles for a first strike. He disobeyed orders and waited. The false alarm faded. His intuition saved the world, but officially he was reprimanded for insubordination. The Doomsday Machine did not reward humanity. It punished it. By then, the sheer volume of weaponry defied comprehension. At its peak, the planet held over 60,000 nuclear warheads. There were bombs that could vaporize mountain ranges, torpedoes designed to flood entire coasts, mines that could poison harbors for centuries. There were even proposals for Project Plowshare, which sought to use nuclear blasts for civil engineering, carving harbors and canals with atomic tools, turning apocalypse into infrastructure. The imagination that once dreamed of progress had merged with the machinery of extinction. Inside the Pentagon, think tanks refined the equations of survival. They spoke of first strike capability, second strike assurance, counterforce balance. Each phrase hid horror behind syllables. Meanwhile, in small towns across America and the Soviet Union, children practiced hiding under desks, citizens dug shelters, and ministers preached calm. Public life became a performance of composure over terror. The mushroom cloud hung invisible above every conversation. It was not only the weapons that grew monstrous, it was the philosophy behind them. Strategists insisted that deterrence was rational, even moral. They argued that by threatening total annihilation, they had prevented conventional wars. Yet the price of peace was permanent psychological siege. The world survived not because of wisdom, but because everyone was too afraid to move. The bomb did not end conflict, it froze it. Civilization entered a kind of suspended animation, a planet-sized standoff maintained by paranoia. Meanwhile, technology crept forward. Missiles became faster. Warning times shrank from hours to minutes. Computers were installed to calculate launch decisions. In the late 1970s, automated command and control systems were integrated so deeply that a single malfunction could cascade across continents. The military called this fail-safe. In truth, it was fail-deadly. Even ordinary accidents became existential. In 1960, radar in Thule, Greenland, detected what looked like a massive Soviet launch. Crews prepared to retaliate until someone realized the radar was seeing the moon rising over Norway. In 1979, a NORAD technician accidentally loaded a training tape simulating an attack. Screens erupted with phantom missiles. Fighters scrambled. Nuclear bombers warmed their engines. Only minutes before launch was the mistake discovered. Each close call added new safety protocols and new layers of complexity, each capable of failing in new ways. Through it all, politicians assured their citizens that control was absolute. They spoke of command authority, of red phones and codes and rational leadership. But those who worked within the system knew better. They saw how close the world had already come, and how little separated civilization from ruin. Many of them carried that knowledge like a private curse. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense during the Cuban Missile Crisis, spent his later life haunted by how narrowly they had escaped. He called deterrence a delicate balance of terror. The delicacy, he admitted, was an illusion. By the end of the 1950s, the Doomsday Machine was no longer a metaphor. It was infrastructure, buried in concrete, coded into circuits, floating beneath the seas. And like all infrastructure, it became invisible through familiarity. People learned to live beside apocalypse the way earlier generations lived beside storms or plagues. They built homes, raised children, went to work, all while knowing that at any hour, somewhere in a desert or forest, a man could turn two keys and end history. The scientists who had created the first bomb had warned of this outcome. In 1946, the physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer told his colleagues, "We have known sin, yet sin, once named, does not vanish, it institutionalizes." Laboratories kept designing, militaries kept ordering, and the public kept pretending the weapons were symbols, not systems. The Doomsday Machine no longer needed villains or heroes. It simply existed, humming quietly beneath civilization like a second heartbeat. That hum would grow louder in the decades to come, reverberating through the wires of command centers, through the halls of government, through the dreams of every child who stared at a poster showing how to survive the end. The hum of the Doomsday Machine became the background noise of civilization. It vibrated beneath ordinary life, steady and almost comforting. As long as it remained constant, people could pretend it wasn't there. The 1960s were filled with contradictions like that, suburban bliss framed by the quiet knowledge that the world could end in 30 minutes. Newspapers printed fallout shelter plans beside advertisements for new refrigerators. Children practiced arithmetic in classrooms where, once a month, they also practiced dying politely under their desks. The government called it preparedness. Psychologists called it denial. Yet somehow it worked. A generation learned to live with annihilation as if it were weather, unpredictable, inevitable, and nobody's fault. In October 1962, that denial cracked. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the moment the theoretical became real. The Soviets had placed nuclear missiles on the island, 90 miles from Florida. American reconnaissance planes spotted them, and for 13 days the world stood on the edge of the abyss. Navy ships surrounded Cuba, fingers hovered over launch keys. Communication between Washington and Moscow was glacial, carried by telegrams and translators. Every message risked being misread. At one point, a Soviet submarine, cut off from radio contact and harassed by depth charges, prepared to fire a nuclear torpedo. The decision required 3 officers to agree. 2 voted yes. 1, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. His hesitation prevented a nuclear exchange. He is almost forgotten by history, but the world may owe its existence to his doubt. The crisis ended through compromise, missiles withdrawn, promises made, faces saved. But it left behind an invisible scar. Everyone involved understood how easily civilization could vanish through confusion. In its aftermath, both sides created new safeguards, the hotline between capitals, new treaties, new promises. Yet these measures were built atop the same old foundation of fear. The only way to guarantee peace was still the threat of extinction. The Cold War settled into its long, paranoid rhythm. During those years, the men who managed the arsenals lived inside paradox. They spent their days planning for a war they prayed would never happen, maintaining readiness for destruction while pretending it was rational. Some drank heavily, some developed ulcers. Many kept silent, aware that to speak too openly about what they knew would invite public panic. To manage the stress, they used euphemism, deterrent posture, strategic stability, launch on warning. Language became armor against the absurdity of their task. The absurdity didn't always stay abstract. In 1968, a U.S. Air Force B-52 carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashed near Thule, Greenland. The bombs broke apart, scattering plutonium across the ice. The cleanup took months. The contamination lasted decades. In 1979, as computers replaced radar scopes, one misplaced training tape convinced NORAD that the United States was under massive attack. Alarms blared across underground command centers. Bombers rolled down runways, engines screaming. At the last moment, a technician noticed something wrong. The incoming missiles weren't appearing on every screen. It was a simulation accidentally running on the live system. The world stood one decision away from irreversible. The 1980s brought the logic of deterrence to its peak. New missiles, faster computers, tighter response times. Each advance in technology promised safety through precision, yet every layer of automation stripped away a little more human judgment. The machines learned to decide faster than their operators could think. Warning times shrank to minutes. Procedures demanded obedience over reflection. The system no longer trusted hesitation. In September 1983, the Soviet Early Warning Network again reported an American launch. 5 missiles this time, rising from the Great Plains. The officer on duty, Stanislav Petrov, faced the same impossible choice Arkhipov once had. Protocol said, retaliate. Instinct said, wait. He waited. It was another false alarm, triggered by sunlight reflecting off clouds. The computers had mistaken light for death. Petrov's refusal saved the planet, but his career ended in disgrace. The system could tolerate error better than intuition. The following month, NATO conducted a large-scale exercise called Able Archer 83, simulating a nuclear release. The Soviets, convinced it was a cover for a real strike, prepared to retaliate for real. For several days, warheads were armed, bombers fueled, submarines deployed. When the exercise ended, both sides quietly stood down. The public never knew how close they had come. Years later, declassified documents revealed just how thin the line had been. A few misunderstandings, a few hours, and the Cold War might have ended in fire. By then, the Doomsday Machine had outgrown the men who built it. Politicians changed, ideologies shifted, but the system endured. It had become self-perpetuating, a global nervous network whose only function was to wait for a signal that must never come. It was elegant in the way a guillotine is elegant, perfectly designed for its purpose. The psychological cost spread beyond the bunkers. Writers and filmmakers turned dread into art. Novels like On the Beach and Fail Safe imagined the aftermath. Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove turned madness into satire, showing generals riding bombs like cowboys, laughing as the world burned. The laughter was uncomfortable because it was accurate. Humor became the only way to look directly at fear without blinking. Ordinary citizens learned to compartmentalize. They watched mushroom cloud footage on television, then tuned in to sitcoms. They joked about the big one, as if naming it would keep it away. Psychologists coined new terms for the phenomenon: psychic numbing, collective denial. It wasn't apathy, it was survival. When faced with a threat too vast to confront, the human mind builds walls of distraction. The Cold War generation built those walls with pop culture and consumerism. Beneath every advertisement's promise of happiness lurked the unspoken bargain: enjoy today because tomorrow might not come. In the 1970s, scientists and activists began warning about the doctrine itself. Astronomer Carl Sagan spoke of nuclear winter, a chain reaction of firestorms that would blot out the sun. Environmentalists pointed out that even a limited exchange would poison the planet beyond recovery. Yet policymakers continued to measure security in megatons. The Doomsday Machine had become an economic ecosystem: jobs, contracts, bases, budgets. To dismantle it would mean dismantling power itself. And so it remained, humming quietly into the 1980s. Then, almost without warning, it began to fade. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, and suddenly the Great Confrontation ended, not with an explosion but with a shrug. The weapons stayed, but the ideology that justified them evaporated. For the first time in half a century, the apocalypse seemed to have been canceled. But the cancellation was an illusion. Tens of thousands of warheads still waited in silos, submarines, and warehouses. Treaties reduced numbers, not danger. The logic of deterrence had sunk too deep into the architecture of global politics to vanish. Even nations newly born from the Soviet collapse inherited fragments of the arsenal. Others, watching from afar, began building their own. The Doomsday Machine simply diversified. Meanwhile, a new generation grew up unaware of how close their parents had lived to extinction. The mushroom cloud became a historical image, not a threat. Yet the infrastructure endured, maintained by technicians who still rotated launch codes and tested circuits. The world had stopped thinking about Armageddon, but the machines had not. They remained, silent and eternal, like gods that no longer required worship. And then, in the new century, something curious happened. The old logic of automation returned, this time draped in the language of technology. Artificial intelligence, autonomous drones, algorithmic decision-making, all promised precision, speed, and safety. The same promises made in the 1950s. Strategists spoke again of removing human hesitation from combat, of decision superiority. The vocabulary changed, the impulse did not. Once more, humanity was teaching machines to think faster than conscience. The parallels were uncanny. Early warning systems became predictive analytics. Command bunkers became data centers. Instead of generals staring at radar screens, engineers now stared at dashboards. Instead of missiles, the payload was information. But the logic, the faith in automation to manage danger, remained identical. The Doomsday Machine had simply migrated from steel to silicon. The truth is that the nuclear arsenal was never dismantled, it was digitized. Launch systems were modernized, targets updated, protocols streamlined. Many weapons still remain on hair-trigger alert, ready to launch within minutes of a perceived threat. The difference now is that the perception may come from a computer, an algorithm parsing sensor data faster than any human could verify. We have not escaped the logic of the 20th century. We have networked it. In that sense, the Cold War never really ended, it was absorbed. Its logic of deterrence, automation, and control seeped into every layer of modern life. We trust invisible systems to regulate markets, route airplanes, even suggest what we should believe. We call it efficiency. But beneath that convenience hums the same assumption that guided the Doomsday Machine, that complex systems are safer when humans get out of the way. Perhaps that's the real inheritance of the atomic age, not the bomb itself, but the belief that survival depends on surrendering control. We handed our fate to machines, and they have never given it back. When historians look back on the 20th century, they will marvel not at our genius for destruction, but at our ability to live beside it. For 40 years, humanity carried its extinction in its pocket and called it peace. We built a world that could end at any moment and decided that normal was good enough. The Doomsday Machine was never just metal and circuits. It was psychological architecture, a way of thinking that still shapes how we design, govern, and dream. Even now, the silos remain. The keys still turn in pairs. The missiles still sleep beneath fields of wheat, their guidance systems quietly updated by technicians who were born decades after the Cold War ended. They work in shifts, check readouts, file reports, and go home to families who never think about the fire under their feet. The machinery hums on, perfect in its indifference. Maybe that's what makes the Doomsday Machine truly terrifying. It doesn't hate, it doesn't choose, it simply waits. And perhaps, one day, something will go wrong, a glitch, a misunderstanding, a decision made too fast for anyone to stop. If that day comes, it won't be out of malice. It will be out of faith, faith in systems, in automation, in the idea that we can program away catastrophe. We built the bomb to make the world safe, and in doing so, made safety impossible. Every age builds its own doomsday machines. They change shape, they change purpose, but their logic endures. Trust the mechanism, doubt yourself. The Cold War's arsenal may rust, but its philosophy thrives wherever fear meets technology. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the same hum, low and constant, beneath the chatter of modern life. It runs through fiber optic cables and satellites, through algorithms and servers, through every circuit that decides faster than we can. The sound of progress and peril, indistinguishable. Because the machines we built to end the world never stopped running. They just found new work. In the end, the Doomsday Machine didn't destroy humanity. It taught us how to live like we already had.